Protein powders offer an easy way to boost your protein intake, but are they necessary? Are some better than others? And where do they fall in this whole ultra processed food debate? Today, I'm breaking down the pros and cons of the most popular options so you can decide whether protein powder belongs in your diet, and if so, which one is right for you. Hello, and welcome to the Nutrition Diva podcast, a show where I unpack the latest nutrition news and headlines and answer your food and nutrition questions so that you can make more informed choices about what to eat. And one question that I'm frequently asked is whether I think that protein powders are a good idea, and if so, which one I think is best. If you're a longtime listener to this podcast, then you probably know that in general, I'm not a big fan of supplements. I really believe that you're better off getting your nutrition from actual whole foods instead of processed pills and powders. And the truth is that most of us are already getting more than enough protein to meet our basic nutritional needs. On the other hand, I've also talked at length about the advantages of diets that are a little higher in protein, more than the amount needed just to meet your basic nutritional needs. Eating more protein can help curb your appetite, which can be really helpful for weight management. It also helps support the growth and the repair of muscle tissue, which can help you get more out of exercise. But the role of protein in muscle protein synthesis specifically is not just relevant for bodybuilders. People who are actively losing weight or recovering from surgery or illness, or even just getting a little bit older, are all at increased risk of muscle loss. And so for people in any of those categories, a higher protein diet can help to stem those losses. Rather than shooting for the recommended daily allowance of just 45 to 50 grams of protein per day, which is enough to meet our basic nutrition needs, many experts now suggest that 60 to 80 grams may be more appropriate for those who are at risk of accelerated muscle loss. And here, I need to remind you that protein alone does not build muscles. In addition to providing those building blocks for muscle synthesis, you also need to use and challenge your muscles in order to trigger that muscle building activity. Now, obviously, you can get more protein simply by adding more protein-rich foods to your diet. Things like eggs, cottage cheese, fish, meat, tofu, or legumes. But for those who, for whatever reason, find it challenging to get enough protein from these foods, protein powders do offer another convenient alternative. For example, a lot of traditional breakfast foods are relatively high in carbs and not that high in protein, particularly the ones that you can grab in a hurry. So adding a scoop of protein powder to a smoothie or to a bowl of hot cereal is a quick and convenient way to get more protein into that first meal of the day. Now, you'll find protein powders made out of all kinds of things, including rice, hemp, and peas, but the most common sources are soy, egg whites, and whey. No matter what they are made from, however, protein powders would all be considered ultra-processed foods. And with all the talk about these UPFs lately, several of you have asked me whether protein powders are therefore just too processed to be considered healthy. So let's tackle that question next. Virtually everything we eat is processed to some degree. If it's been washed, peeled, frozen, steamed, baked, or pureed, it's been processed. So perhaps it's more helpful to think of processing on a spectrum. So a grape still on the vine would be at one end of that spectrum, and a grape-flavored jelly bean would obviously be on the other end of that spectrum. And somewhere in between those extremes, you would find raisins, grape juice, and grape jelly. In my view, the goal is not to completely eliminate all processed foods, which I don't think would even be possible. It's more realistic to think about choosing foods that are closer to the less processed end of the spectrum as often as we can. But I think it's also worth considering what the purpose of that processing is. Is it to concentrate the sugar, to increase the intensity of the flavor, or otherwise create a product that hyperstimulates the reward centers of the brain? Is the processing in order to increase the profit margin of a cheap ingredient? Or does that processing serve to extend shelf life or increase the nutritional value of a food, improve its digestibility, or make a nutritious food safer or more convenient to prepare? Obviously, the processing required to turn peas or whey into protein powder serves a different purpose than the processing required to turn an ear of corn into a bag of Cool Ranch Doritos. For myself, I think that the benefit of the additional protein justifies the use of a processed ingredient like protein powder. Your answer might depend on how easy it is for you to meet your protein needs from other foods in your diet. So, if you feel that a protein powder would be a useful addition to your diet, the next question is, which one should you choose? Obviously, if you are allergic or otherwise intolerant of soy, eggs, or dairy, you'd want to avoid protein powders made from those. And vegans won't want to use protein powders made from eggs or dairy. But beyond that, is one better than the others? Now, if you Google the search phrase, what protein powder is best, you're going to come across all kinds of stuff talking about glutamine this and branched chain amino acid that and biological value whatever. And this is mostly directed at competitive bodybuilders, or maybe those trying to look like competitive bodybuilders. For those of us who merely aspire to visible abs or to look decent in a sleeveless top, these minute differences between various protein sources are not that significant. All of them can help to keep a lid on your appetite. All of them provide a good array of amino acids, those basic building blocks that your body uses for growth and muscle repair. With that said, let's take a closer look at some of the pros and cons of the most common options, starting with the animal-based proteins. Egg whites are a source of high-quality, complete protein that is very efficiently used in the body. However, protein powders made from egg whites tend to be rather expensive and, honestly, not the best tasting stuff in the world. Whey is a more economical source for high-quality protein, and whey, of course, is a byproduct of cheese production. And because we eat a lot of cheese in this country, there is a very abundant supply. So liquid whey is dried, purified, and then concentrated into a high-quality protein powder. For me, it's nice to think that all that whey can be put to good use. Whey protein may contain small amounts of lactose. So if a completely lactose-free option is a priority, you might want to go with whey protein isolate, which is a purer but also more expensive version. Collagen protein mixes easily into liquids without adding much taste or texture, which makes it a very versatile option. It does tend to be on the pricey side. Because it is derived from animal sources, it may not be suitable for vegetarians or vegans. Collagen is also somewhat unusual among the animal protein sources in that it is not a complete protein. For that reason, it's not the best choice for muscle building, but many people take it for its supposed benefits for skin elasticity and joint health. And finally, if you're game, insect protein, such as cricket powder, is an emerging and highly sustainable option, providing a complete amino acid profile with very good digestibility. Cricket protein tends to have a mild, sort of nutty flavor, which honestly is easier to mask than some of the plant-based proteins. However, the biggest barrier, I think, right now in these insect-based protein powders is simply consumer acceptance. Many people are still pretty squeamish about eating insects. I don't know, go figure. But insect protein is also relatively expensive compared to traditional protein powders due to its limited production scale. I think it will get cheaper over time. Let's now look at the plant-based options. Among vegan protein powders, soy will give you the highest quality protein, and it has the added benefits of isoflavones. compounds that appear to help regulate cholesterol and reduce the risk of heart disease, as well as also offering some protection against breast and prostate cancer. Pea protein is an increasingly popular plant-based option, offering a good amount of protein per serving and a decent amino acid profile, though it is not a complete protein. It can cause bloating and gassiness, though, in some people due to its fiber content, and it sometimes has a sort of gritty texture. On the plus side, pea protein is one of the more affordable plant-based proteins. Rice protein is hypoallergenic, very easy to digest. That makes it a good choice for those with food sensitivities. However, it is also not a complete protein, so it's not as effective for muscle protein synthesis. And for this reason, rice protein is sometimes combined with pea protein to create a more balanced amino acid profile. Rice protein is generally affordable, and it has a relatively mild taste, but it can be a little chalky in texture. Hemp protein is another plant-based option that contains all the amino acids, although it is somewhat lower in both lysine and leucine, so it is still less optimal for muscle protein synthesis on its own. One of its biggest advantages is that it is quite minimally processed, and it also provides fiber, healthy fats, those omega-3s, and minerals like magnesium and iron. Hemp protein has a pretty distinct nutty flavor that some people really enjoy. Other people might find that overpowering. And it is usually more expensive than pea or rice protein, but it often really appeals to those who are looking for a less processed, whole food-based option as a protein powder. And finally, protein powders made from algae are a somewhat newer and very sustainable option. Algae protein contains all the essential amino acids, but again, levels of certain amino acids, such as lysine, tend to be a bit lower, so it's not quite as efficient a source of protein as soy. On the plus side, algae-based proteins often provide additional nutrients, such as plant-based omega-3s and antioxidants. Perhaps the biggest downside is that they can have a strong, somewhat fishy or marine flavor that can be pretty hard to mask. And cost is another downside, as algae proteins are still relatively expensive compared to the more established sources like whey or soy. So, as you can see, each of these sources has its own pros and cons, but any of these would be a convenient way to add additional protein to your diet. But whatever type of protein powder you choose, I suggest looking for a product with a minimum of extra stuff. You're going to pay a lot more for those fancy formulas with all the added herbs and extracts and adaptogens, but really there's no clear evidence that they're adding extra benefit. Remember, the goal here is primarily to add protein to your diet. You don't need a powder that's also going to do your taxes for you. If you're looking for a protein powder that you can simply shake up with some water, such as after a workout or on the road, you probably are going to want one that has a little bit of flavoring. But if you're going to be adding it to a smoothie or cereal or soup or muffins or dips, I suggest avoiding the added flavors and the sweeteners entirely. And you know what? If you're looking for some more ideas on how to use protein powder, I've included a link in the show notes to a blog post that I wrote with tons of ideas that you may not have thought of for using protein powder to bump up the protein in foods that you may already be eating. And finally, even though adding more protein to your diet can have a lot of advantages, protein still contains calories, and excess calories can lead to weight gain. So unless you're trying to gain weight, when you add protein, you probably need to subtract something else. And in this case, I think it makes the most sense to subtract some of the starches in your diet in order to make room for that extra protein. For example, you might want to add a scoop of protein powder to your smoothie and then skip the toast. I hope you found this overview of protein powders helpful. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, you can email it to me at nutrition@quickanddirtytips.com. And if you'd like to find out about having me speak at your next live or virtual event, you can learn more at wellnessworkshere.com. Nutrition Diva is a quick and dirty tips podcast. Steve Riekeberg is our audio engineer. Brandon Getches provides script editing. Holly Hutchings is the digital operations specialist, and Morgan Christensen heads up our podcast operations and advertising. Davina Tomlin heads up marketing and publicity, and we also get indispensable support from Nat Hoops. Thanks to all of them, and thanks to you for listening.